Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a series of webinars that we have been putting in place for our cultural and visitor attractions across the city. My name is Nick Bodger. I'm Cultural and Visitor Development Director for the City of London, and today's webinar is Embedding Sustainability Across Your Events and Venues. We are really honoured to have Julie's Bicycle here today, and I will talk about them very shortly. First, a few housekeeping rules. Please note your camera and microphone will be switched off throughout the event. You can chat through the chat function to other attendees though, so please feel free to do that. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact the City Events team in the chat function privately using that chat function. In order to ask the speakers questions, we really encourage you to do that. We will answer questions at the end, but please do so via the Q&A function. And please feel free to vote on questions so we know the ones that are most popular to answer. So first of all, just to say the City of London Corporation has been very active in the field of climate action, and indeed we have a number of services and functions that may support organisations like yourselves. Not least of those is Heart of the City, which I know my colleagues will post into the chat. Heart of the City is something that supports SMEs to be a force for good, helping business leaders to kickstart their responsible business journeys with workshops, masterclasses, webinars, and expert mentors who will coach organizations and take them through to the next level. So please do look out for that, check that one out. You may find some help there. Similarly, last year we launched our climate action strategy, which is a radical action strategy, which breaks new ground and sets out how the organisation will achieve net zero emissions and build climate resilience and champion sustainable growth over the next 2 decades. Again, that's been posted in the chat for you to have a look at. And our target is to achieve net zero carbon emissions from our own operations by 2027, and to achieve net carbon zero emissions across all our investments and supply chain by 2040. So with no more ado, time to introduce Julie's Bicycle, a London-based charity that supports the creative community to act on climate change and environmental sustainability. They believe that the creative community is uniquely placed to transform the conversation around climate change and to translate that into action. They provide the creative community with the skills to act, using their creativity to influence one another, audiences, and the wider movement, running a rich program of events, free resources, and public speaking engagements, which contribute to national and international climate change policy development. Now, we've been working with them very closely over recent months, looking at what we can do across our own assets and programs. Not least of those, we're developing a sustainability checklist for our artists in our outdoor arts program, working with our market suppliers, street food markets, to look at how we can reduce carbon footprint there, developing an artist application pack for our City Arts Initiative around public art in the public realm, looking at energy efficiency across the City Information Centre and Guildhall Art Gallery, and a whole list of other interesting and exciting projects, trying very much to drive climate responsibility at the heart of our operations. So with no more ado, I'm going to introduce you to Graciela, I'm going to get this wrong, Malitzko Thornton from Julie's Bicycles. She is the Creative Green Program Lead at Julie's Bicycles. Graciela, welcome, and over to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for that fantastic introduction. You said a lot of things, Nick, that I was going to say, so I'm just going to go into the topic. We are doing this, we are very proud and very happy to be working with the City of London, with event teams and other teams as well in the organization. We'll be looking how to embed sustainability. This is quite core in our everyday work. It's been a difficult year. for everybody, obviously, very challenging, but at the same time, there is a lot of organizations that are looking at how to do things differently when the venues reopen, when planning new events, when engaging with suppliers, artists, all the infrastructure that gets moved on in all these events. So in that respect, we can see a real change in the last year in terms of awareness, reviewing practice, and planning better. So we are really very excited. And this year is particularly important because all the climate change negotiations that are going to take place in Glasgow in November. So there is quite a lot of attention towards what's happening in the United Kingdom in terms of the road to net zero carbon and how to involve everybody in the supply chain, in particularly for businesses and at political and city level as well. So watch the space because there will be quite a lot of very, very interesting conversations and very interesting decisions as well. Without any doubt, the creative ecosystem needs systemic change and that's changing relationships, incorporating sustainability, but it also incorporating principles of justice, not leaving anybody behind when we are looking at the road to net zero. And this is just a little bit brief to introduce the frameworks we work with when we are working with organizations embedding sustainability. We obviously use the climate change framework, the approaches to net zero, how to implement all these carbon reduction plans, but we also look at nature-based solutions, how to reinforce the role of nature in cities or in rural areas as well. And we also consider circular economy principles when we are planning events and when we are designing new creative interventions. And as I said, all embedded under the principle of justice. So what environmental justice means as well globally. We are a charity. We've been around since 2007. We now work globally. And so is coming a very, very interesting stream of work internationally, particularly in the material area, all the materials that we use in theater, in music, in visual arts. Is very interesting to look at it globally across the supply chain. Today, we are going to focus in this webinar in terms of looking at understanding environmental impacts in the first place in the cultural sector. And then we are going to share a number of case studies because we think that that's what's really inspiring. That's how we work. All our research builds the business case. Sorry, I got problems with this today. So all our research and the work we do with organizations builds the business case, and they are, okay, yeah, it should sound better now. And they are the base for all our policy work, because we start working with organizations, but then we translate all that learning in developing and building bridges between cultural policy and environmental policy. And that's quite an important area of our work, and it grows the ecosystem. So we find out that, yeah, that's our part of our theory of change, if you want to call it like that, but it's part of our everyday practice. So I am going to introduce you to my colleague, Becky Hazelgood and Will Price, that they are going to be taking us throughout this webinar, and I will be very happy to join again for questions at the end of the webinar.
Thank you very much, Graciela, for that introduction. I'm just going to share my slides now. So I'm not going to dwell too much on Julie's bicycle because we've already had an excellent introduction from both Nick and Graciela. But I'm just going to highlight our two objectives, which are to support culture to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, and also to advocate for culture to inspire action on climate change and sustainability. So as we mentioned, Julie's bicycle work at the intersection of environmental sustainability and arts and creative industries. So bringing together our expertise in both of these areas allows us to have this really diverse programme of events. And this slide shows some of those areas that we work on. So advocacy, research, training, consultancy. And we're going to be talking, Will's going to be explaining a little bit more about what we do in some of these areas shortly. But before we go into the main bulk of the presentation, I thought it was worth setting the context for culture and climate change and starting to look precisely at what that means in the work that we do. So it's not news to anybody that the world is warming, and these are 7 things that we're absolutely sure of. We know it's because of humans. We know that ice is melting fast. We're seeing more and more extreme patterns of weather. We know that there's been dramatic consequences for wildlife and biodiversity. A recent report last year showed that around 1 million species are now at risk of extinction, which is a shocking number. But overall, we know, most importantly, that we can do something about it. So this graph is from the IPCC reports, and it shows that basically that we're currently on a pathway to around 3 degrees of warming. So if we carry on at current rates, we'll get to 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming within the next 3 decades. If we want to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, we have until 2050 at the absolute latest to bring down emissions. But that's only going to be possible if we start acting now. And the current 10 years that we're in at the moment are absolutely crucial for making those deep cuts in carbon emissions. Every fraction of a degree basically matters. So the difference between 1.5 and 3 degrees might not sound like very much, but in global terms, just a fraction of a degree can make all the difference between things such as whether coral reefs survive, the amount of habitat loss that we experience, and the amount of severe weather events such as droughts that we experience. We've really seen a huge transitional shift in public values and awareness over the last couple of years, particularly, and we're now seeing the Fridays for Future movement and the Extinction Rebellion movements as well have really drawn increasing national and global attention to the urgency of the situation. So why culture? Our work at Julie's Bicycle recognises the role of the cultural sector is truly unique and powerful in supporting the radical change and addressing the climate and ecological crises. Ultimately, these crises are systemic issues and they require shifts in our behaviour, our attitudes and our practices. So these are some of the opportunities that we feel that culture can bring to this space. So culture forms a vital part of the human experience in everyday life. It brings communities together, empowers and inspires, provides space to reflect, contemplate and critique. It can motivate citizenship, activism and drive positive change. Culture can often be a catalyst for innovation, such as testing new models, technologies, and I'm going to be talking about the different impact areas from the cultural sector later in the presentation. Whilst the cultural sector isn't as heavily polluting as other industries, if we're to reach the reduction in emissions that we need to achieve, then every sector and every organisation matters. So I'm just going to briefly hand over to Will, He's going to be talking about some of the tools and resources that we have at Julie's Bicycle.
Perfect. Thanks, Becky, and good morning, everyone. So, as Becky said, I'm just going to mention just a couple of bits around, I guess, taking action within, whether it's an organization, whether it's events, whether it's a local authority, and also more specifically in relation to our work at JB, and just a few examples of how that works, and we've touched on it already. And just kind of, I guess, to start off with is just this simple diagram really to show a really simple way of thinking about how to take action, again, within an organization and within a network, and really thinking about these 4 areas which are crucial. So that's commitment, understanding, improvement, and communicating. And by commitment, what we mean there is, right from the get-go, is making sure that you're creating and maintaining clear policies, strategies, responsibilities within your organization. Really being clear from the get-go that of what you're trying to achieve, what are your commitments, and kind of formalizing that, like I said, in something like a policy, a strategy. There's understanding. So, sorry, can you go back? Thanks, Becky. So understanding, so being accountable for your organization's impacts. So like I said, particularly if you're doing this for the first time, you want to make sure that you understand where your biggest impacts are, that you have a system in place for monitoring those impacts, particularly if you have targets and ambitions that you've established, in policies. We've mentioned things like net zero, but any reduction targets or plans that you want to set, you really want to have an understanding and a system for tracking that, if you're going to be able to track that improvement and kind of ultimately deliver on those expectations and those commitments. On the improvement side, so really that's focusing on actively working to reduce your environmental impacts. So you've got your commitment, you've got your understanding, and then you're taking actions to reduce it. And then on the final side is communication. So once you've kind of gone through that process, there's the value in communicating with your stakeholders. So whether it's internally within your team, whether it's the people that attend your events, the partners that you work with, suppliers, whoever it might be, but kind of going through that process of communicating and engaging, because often this work doesn't happen in silos, and you need to collaborate with people that you work with, and certainly within your wider communities, often to get things moving, and certainly in the case of local authorities and things like that. So yeah, these 4 things are kind of crucial when thinking about taking action. And in terms of the work at Julie's Bicycle, we have a program called Creative Green, which we've mentioned already, which really is very closely aligned to that kind of framework listed there. And this is based around a framework for change for taking action, which is looking again at commitment, understanding, improvement. And this is kind of the approach that we take when working with different organizations to kind of embed sustainability and to take action on reducing their environmental impacts. And in terms of the way the Creative Green program works, there's a variety of different things that we kind of do under that. So everything that's listed on the right there. So whether that's carbon calculators, whether it's doing things like certifications, one-to-one consultancy projects, but it's kind of all focused on this desire of working within the sector to reduce environmental impacts and deliver change within the sector. So I mentioned tools. So something that we have that Julie's Bicycle has developed, which has been around for I think almost 10 years now, is the Creative Green tools, which is a free online tool that we've developed for organizations to report on the carbon impacts of their activities within the sector. So it's been designed specifically for the arts and cultural sector, and you can record the impacts of everything from kind of offices to venues, events, so indoor events, outdoor events. It could be tours, so whether that's a touring production, it could be anything involving travel in that way. And it's a free tool that we kind of encourage organizations to use, particularly if you're doing reporting for the first time, if you're maybe just starting to do this work, or you've made some commitments, you want to track it, and having a system in place for doing it. And it's quite a simple tool for kind of coming up with what is that carbon figure, and particularly if you're doing something like coming up with a baseline, I would recommend having a look at it. And like I said, it's a free tool. You can set up an account, as your organization, as the people you work with, and kind of have a look at what's on there. But it's hopefully a useful tool for doing that monitoring when you're starting out. I mentioned certification. So the Creative Green certification is a service that we provide where, again, it's designed for the sector, where we're effectively doing an independent assessment of, you know, the environmental work of, again, an organization. It could be an event, it could be a tour. So and kind of how this works is that we, you know, the organization or the event, say in this case, would provide us information, including the kind of, you know, the impact data of their activities, of their event, also information around their best practice. So what policies do they have in place? What do they, you know, what do they do on procurement? What do they do on engagement? What do they do across kind of all the things that, all the different types of sustainability work you can do as an event or an organization. And JB does an assessment of that process. And there's a kind of a scoring process involved where we kind of score that on a scale of kind of 1 to 5 stars, and we deliver a report, you know, for that event or organization, where we kind of highlight areas that they've done well. There's a footprint included, but also crucially having recommendations within each of those sections that I've mentioned. So what you're doing around commitment, what you're doing around understanding and improvement. And the certification is really, a kind of a way of checking in on your progress and also having a bit of a steer on where to go in terms of moving forward. So consultancy as well. So again, we, as well as doing some of those other services, we do bespoke kind of one-to-one work with organizations. And actually the City of London work that we've talked about already that Nick and Graziella have mentioned would kind of fall within this category of the work that we do under Creative Green. And I guess that it varies quite a lot. And this can be anything from, you know, a one-off piece of work, so something as small as, say, an energy audit, or it could be a carbon footprint or a report of, an event or a building, to a much larger kind of transformational project where we're working with an organization or an institution on developing things like environmental policies, action plans. We also do things like staff training, workshops, events as well. And yeah, the scale of those projects really varies, but the focus is on those kind of transformational ideas and really embedding sustainability within the organization. And the City of London work is a great example of that. So just to mention quickly, we, like I said, we have obviously this consultancy work that we do and the certification, and kind of as part of that, we try to create a bit of a community within the sector around organizations who are taking this kind of action. And we run a series of, you know, events. We do often, you know, a couple of events a year for that group of organizations. We also have an annual award event called the Creative Green Awards, where an opportunity, kind of annually to give back a bit to the sector and celebrate some of the great case studies and examples of work that people are doing. We did manage to do it last year in a kind of virtual sense, which actually went smoother than you would think, and which was good. But I guess that the key being is bringing people together from different areas of the sector, from different backgrounds, different experience levels, and getting people to kind of share their ideas and have an opportunity to kind of collaborate together is important. And then just on a kind of a separate note, a piece of work that we also do, which is I guess a big piece of the work that JB does, is we have a program with Arts Council England, which is effectively the delivery partner of their environmental program. So around in 2012, Julie's Bicycle was kind of instrumental in the creation of this program with the Arts Council, which originally started out as a simple reporting requirement where organisations that received a particular funding from the Arts Council were asked to report on their environmental impacts and to provide an environmental policy and an action plan. And kind of since then, the program's kind of developed over the years. And now we deliver quite a large program for, at the moment, it's around 800 organizations within that kind of portfolio who have to do this reporting. And they do that through our program, the Creative Green Tools. And as part of that program, we deliver everything from events, free resources, providing the tools, and lots of different work that go around it, which is, a great example within the sector of a program where organizations are kind of working collectively. And actually on the next slide, I've just got a quick kind of little animation type thing, which just gives an indication of some of the information we've managed to be able to collect through that program, which hopefully is interesting. There is no sound on it, so don't worry if you think the sound is cut out, because it will be quiet for 30 seconds or so. And if you want to know more about any of that work, I would just recommend looking at the last report we wrote for the Arts Council, which you can find on our website. Thank you. I'm just going to pass back over to Becky now, actually, who's going to carry on looking at some of the examples from within the sector.
Thank you very much, Will. That's brilliant. Okay, so for the next section of the presentation, we're going to be looking at the different areas that you can address within your organisation, and it's basically an idea of bringing together what zero carbon culture means for the sector. So we'll look at energy, circular economy, transport, diets, collaborations and partnerships. So I'm going to move on to the first impact area, which is the energy, which is the one that people often think about first. So for a zero carbon cultural sector, we really need to achieve less energy and zero carbon energy sources for cultural buildings and events. So what that means in practice, monitoring and measuring energy and having a robust energy management strategy is really the vital first step with energy. So by understanding your usage, you can understand how to make improvements and where best to focus your efforts. So often an energy audit of a building is a really good starting point. Investing in energy efficiency and renewables such as heat pumps. And for events, often trying to use mains power rather than diesel generators, for example, can really reduce the impact of an event. So, for example, green batteries and on-site generation, renewable generation. You can also consider alternative fuels, such as vegetable fuels as well. So this case study, in recent years, Watts Gallery Artist Village, it's in Surrey, and it's focused heavily on energy reduction, and that's from improving insulation through to window glazing and solar shading, through to installing high efficiency boilers and LED lighting. They also generate renewable energy on site via ground source heat pumps and solar thermal hot water systems. But also environmental responsibility and awareness are really deeply rooted within the Watts Gallery Trust's ethos. So that's a really nice case study of an organisation that's had an approach bringing together lots of different elements. One of the strands of the Arts Council England programme is called Spotlight, and we're working very closely with around 30 large MPOs, which collectively make up a significant proportion of the cultural sector's footprint. So we're working closely with them to set science-based targets and environmental impact reduction objectives, and as well as that, we're combining the approach with creating governance frameworks that support reaching these reduction measures, and long-term strategies as well. So Another key part of the programme is to create opportunities for organisations to share best practice around energy efficiency and reduction. It's basically a really interesting programme. So the next area is a circular and creative economy. So definitions vary for what a circular economy actually means, but it can be based upon 3 core principles, which are designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So in practice, this could be anything from looking at the set design of a festival or an event through to looking at your procurement strategy and putting in place responsibly sourced materials, ways of designing out wasteful use of things like single-use plastics, or an artist or organisational practice or policy which supports strategies for material use which focus on a life cycle approach. So understanding how things are sourced, how they can be reused, repurposed or recycled in the most efficient way possible. These are just some of the challenges for the cultural sector when it comes to implementing a circular economy approach. So often choosing the lowest impact materials can be difficult to understand when making a choice between one thing or another. Consumer expectations and habits can play a role. Understanding recycling and disposal options can sometimes be a bit of a minefield, looking at what's available in terms of waste contractors and understanding what actually happens to materials at the end of life. And assessing supply chains and supply chain transparency is another challenge. But this is a really excellent case study of a festival which have fully embraced a circular economy approach. So in 2017, Digital Festival in Amsterdam, or in the Netherlands, combined, they worked with the consultancy Metabolic. So they undertook a full material flow analysis of everything that they used at the festival. The project was funded by the Dutch government's Green Sector Deal, which aims to tackle waste in the festival industry. So they used the festival as a pilot of a closed loop system, and it was hoped that the analysis could underpin a zero waste circular festival strategy for festivals at large and on an ongoing basis. So some of the initiatives that they put in place were a circular food court, sustainable sourcing of food, a resource collection point, which encouraged audience engagement in what people were doing. They used an innovative composting scheme, and they made, in terms of disposables, they used reusable cups and deposit scheme. They had an on-site recycling hub, and they used some very innovative recycling practices, such as turning urine to drinking water and fertilizer and bottle caps into oil. So this infographic shows the material analysis that they did. So on the left there, you can see all of the inputs of the things that they, the materials they used for the festival. So infrastructure and decor were a really large part. And then they look at, on the right hand side, those are the outputs. And this allowed them to start to focus in on the highest impact areas. So I'll touch briefly on paper and printing, because it's often a part of lots of different businesses. So reviewing your procurement strategy is an excellent first step here, and understanding the sourcing of paper. Try if you can to source recycled paper, and also assess your waste contract to see what the options are for end of life. Avoiding things like lamination and varnishing can be really important to help the recyclability, and using inks with a higher proportion of vegetable-based oils, and ensuring that pigments are free of heavy metals as well. Sustainable and zero carbon travel and transport is a really important area, and it's one of the sector's most significant impacts when we look at the impact of audience travel, for example. I know many of you are based in the city centre, so some of the really areas where you can have an influence are things like artist bookings. So understanding where artists are traveling from and using policies and guidelines to encourage artists to travel sustainably. Communicating with audiences is another really important thing that you can do. So making it easy for audiences to understand public transport options that are available. You can use incentives, and also some other city centre-based approaches have involved using surveys to understand audience barriers to using public transport. So sometimes when this is done, you can do things like adjust show times or adjust visitor opening times to fit alongside public transport timetables. Also, when putting on an event, sourcing labour and materials locally where possible. So using local contractors can really impact on travel emissions. And for museums, exhibitions and events, also efficient understanding your freighting and transport options, and packing efficiently and reducing the weight of the materials that you use can also really have a significant impact. So food and drink, this is a really, really important area. Globally, agriculture is responsible for around 80% of global deforestation, and drivers linked to food production cause around 70% of terrestrial biodiversity loss, which when you think about it is a huge, huge impact. So understanding, readdressing how we produce and consume food can have a huge impact on emissions globally. So agriculture accounts for around 26% of greenhouse gas emissions. So this infographic here, I just wanted to share this to show the carbon footprint of some different food groups. So you'll see that beef at the top there is by far the highest in terms of emissions. And as you go down the food chain, you'll see that vegetables have a far less impact. Usually they have around 50% less carbon impact, and that's because of all of the resources that go into farming, such as and keeping animals alive, basically. So the carbon footprint of a meat lover's diet is approximately double that of a vegan diet. So that really helps to show the importance of starting to introduce more vegetarian meals for our venues and events, and communicating some of these issues to audiences as well can have a huge impact. As a case study, I'd like to share Roskilde Festival in Denmark. So they've taken a really rigorous approach to understanding the carbon impact of their menu. So they worked very closely with their partners, suppliers, stalls and associations, and offered training to association managers on sustainable food. So they've set a goal to become 100% organic, but in order to do that, they've set year-on-year targets. They also partnered with an organisation called Carbon Cloud, and they worked with Carbon Cloud to assess to understand the carbon footprint of every single menu on across the festival. So a huge undertaking, but they could then share with audiences what the carbon footprint was for every dish, so 880 dishes across the festival. And from there, that allowed them to start to look at some of the more high impact dishes and what traders and food organisations could do to reduce those impacts. So one of the big traders, a burger joint, started to reduce the amount of beef in their burgers and replaced some of that with plant mince, which had a really big impact on reducing the carbon emissions. So nature and biodiversity is a hugely important area, and it's one where the cultural sector can have a real impact, both in terms of reconnecting audiences to nature. As we increasingly live in cities, people are becoming very disconnected, and arts and culture offer a really exciting opportunity to give people access to nature. So The arts can help to improve our understanding of nature and its threats, to celebrate our biodiversity in green spaces and help people connect to them. Support citizen science biodiversity projects as well, and the regeneration of natural sites, and build bridges between Indigenous knowledge and other kinds of knowledge. So I'd like to share this case study, which is from Melbourne. It's called the Living Pavilion, and it was a part event space, part garden and part exhibition. It was part of a global initiative by the artist Tanya Beer, and it uses sustainable design and participatory arts to transform urban spaces into accessible and ecologically thriving gathering places for people. So the space here, it was transformed from basically not a very interesting piece of land in the city centre, and after transforming it into this event space for 3 weeks, they put on a temporary landscape design and planted 40,000 different native plants, and put on performances from Indigenous and non-Indigenous leaders, artists, knowledge sharers and scientists. The project was so successful that after the temporary event space, they decided to turn it into a permanent part of the city's landscape. And one of the key aims of the project were to engage people of all ages and walks of life in the cultural and ecological significance of the region's native wildlife and species in a way that's both fun and also accessible. So communications and engaging audiences and visitors and inspiring action on climate and the environment is a really important part of the cultural sector. And just some of the opportunities are below. So spreading the word about the issues, sparking dialogues, encouraging collaborations, celebrating the successes of what's been achieved, and inspiring further action as well. So campaigns and branding can be really powerful tools to help organisations to do this. So Live Nation have their own brand, which is Green Nation, which they use for everything under their sustainability programme. This kind of gives audiences, helps audiences to connect between different initiatives and see them as one part of one big programme. There's also campaigns such as the One Less campaign, which was across the City of London, combined with cultural organisations to reduce plastic consumption within the city. And then there's external campaigns as well that could be good to link with, such as the Wildlife Trust's 30 Days Wild, which encourages people to share their experiences and get out into nature via social media. And as a final area of opportunity is working with local and regional policymakers to support net zero plans. So Julie's Bicycle have been working with global cities and organisations such as the World Cities Cultural Forum to understand the trends and opportunities for bringing together cultural and environmental policy. So cities are ideal test grounds for new sustainable models of living and the centres for the creative economy at the same time. So the cultural sector can provide the tools we need in these spaces to kind of reimagine the future, and a chance to rethink infrastructure, transport and social norms as well. So through our work in this area, we started seeing more city policies and strategies breaking silos and working in more interdisciplinary ways, weaving culture and environment to make cities healthier, greener and more prosperous through the arts. And also linking cultural and environmental policy in cities is also a really effective way of generating civic engagement. So we have a report called Culture and Climate Change, which is full of case studies and examples of this work. So some of the examples include things like cultural organisations working together to meet city emissions reduction targets, funders requiring organisations to have an environmental policy, and cultural cultural policies which identify the natural environment as part of the cultural heritage and aiming to preserve and value traditional and native approaches to environmental stewardship. So that wraps up all of our key impact areas, which leaves us with around 15 minutes for some questions from the audience.
Thank you, Becky. Please do start adding your Q&As, questions to the Q&A function, and we will get things answered. I just wanted to ask the group if they could give us an idea. I mean, all of this is very good, and obviously we are all committed to climate action. But clearly, cultural organisations are working with ever more decreasing budgets and are very difficult. They've been very hard hit by the pandemic. I wonder if there's any indication of what sort of costs are involved in actually delivering some of the actions that you've talked about. How much does it cost to work with Julie's Bicycle? Should people want to come to you? Are you able to answer that question, Becky, or somebody else?
Yeah, I'm happy to start off, and maybe Graciela can add a bit about the consultancy programme. So some of the things that I've mentioned can actually be zero cost. So some steps that you can take that don't need to cost you anything at all. So for example, some energy efficiency measures and behaviour change campaigns can be really effective in terms of reducing emissions, but the only cost is really some time and some thought to make them successful. But obviously some of the longer term investments, such as renewable energy strategies and on-site renewables, can obviously be more expensive, but they do have a payback period and can give you savings in the long run, so add to helping you to be more resilient and sustainable going forward. I don't know if Graciela, if I pass to you to talk about some of the other consultancy costs.
Yes, so our carbon footprint calculator is free, so it doesn't cost anything. So I would recommend that people start looking at what are the main environmental impacts in terms of energy use, water use, waste, food, if they want to look at procurement or the main areas of procurement. And so that doesn't have a cost. So also we got a huge amount of research reports. I would really encourage you to have a look, particularly at the one of the impact of digital, the plastic ones. We got one about carbon offsetting that is just to come out. And we do also free training, which is all online available. So we got a session on performance indicators, developing policies. We got climate change 101 for staff as well. So all those are free. If you want to do the certification to provide you an evaluation of where you are and a third-party review, that's a light touch service that we provide, and that costs £1,000 at the moment. It's normally a bit more expensive, but with COVID, we understand that organizations are struggling. So people complete and put all the information online, and one member of the team review and makes a set of recommendations. And if it's a more detailed piece of work, to be honest, it really depends on what it is. We've been trying, we fully understand that organizations are struggling at the moment. Cultural organizations is a very difficult, challenging time for everybody. So with some organizations, what we've done is that they are actually doing all the first element, and we mentor them, and we provide advice. So it's a lighter touch consultancy piece of work. And if with some other organizations, they want to review completely from a transformational point of view, how to do everything differently. So that is more time involving, and we normally divide our consultancy services between supporting environmental policy and strategies, training, procurement review. Some people want to focus on the carbon footprint, but that's what I encourage people to do it on their own initially, and then we do a review. And yeah, staff training as well. In terms of procurement, what we've done with the City of London, I think is quite interesting in terms of looking at the commissioning and engagement process with artists and events organizers and everybody at the supply chain, and we work through this procurement checklist. If it's difficult to put a price on that one, really.
Of course, thank you, Graciela. I think yes, obviously it's how long is a piece of string, really, isn't it? But thank you very much. That's really helpful. Just looking at some of the questions coming up in the chat, we have one from Helen Charles at Bloomberg, which is very pertinent to some work that's going on at the moment, actually. She's saying, we often rely heavily on vinyl for temporary installations. Is there a more sustainable alternative recyclable product that they could use?
Yes, that's something that is coming quite frequently. We are working with a company. I'm going to disclose our partnership because this comes from a research project. We found out that Secord is a company that is looking at how to reuse, actually. If they don't normally use vinyl, but if they use vinyl, they got a system in place, a process where they can reuse it. So as well, there's those options. There's not that many companies really that are looking into that. That's something that there should be. We raised this issue with Innovate UK before. That is an area that requires more research and development, definitely. So the printing companies can reduce their impacts. So I would recommend that you have a look at what Secord is doing. They got very good information in their website. And there is another company that is working quite intensively in, I can't remember now the name, but I can have a look and send it away, recycling vinyl. So they receive also all the vinyl and they produce new vinyl. So
thanks, Graciela. That's great. So a couple of more questions that I hope we can get through before the end. One here from Alice. If an event or organization could do just one thing to be more sustainable, what would you suggest? I mean, clearly you're seeing common issues coming up. Is there one thing that actually would have greatest impact that an event or an organization is normally blind to?
If it's a venue, I would say look at energy in the first place, really, because that's where most of the carbon footprint comes. If it's an event, engage with all the participants, because transport is very important. But we always say that basically is where can you have, where do you control, where do you have more control in your decisions? Start with that element, because there is what you can control and what you can influence. In the first place, where you are most responsible, really, which area of impact. I don't know if Will or Becky can.
Thank you. In fact, that leads nicely, segues onto the next question, which I think you've kind of answered. But what have you found to be the biggest barriers to improving sustainability within the organizations you've worked with, or within the creative industries overall?
I think, one thing is always the value of having the buy-in of senior leadership or the senior team that is working within that organization, because I think that's often where, and I guess that's what we try to do with our projects, is engage with those people and bring people together in that way. Because I think often where things get stuck is that a lot of work happens in silos, where people are doing great stuff in certain departments, or there's a few individuals who are really passionate, who would pushing things forwards, but it reaches a limit where they need support from someone else. There might be a financial thing that they need, and it's kind of it runs into a wall almost. And it's that thing of how to really engage it collectively across the organization, particularly when you're dealing with an event, you know, the number of moving parts and people involved, suppliers, all that kind of stuff. It's that the difficulty of that if you don't have the collective buy-in, or at least the support of the senior team with it. So I think that's the key thing, is that you can make good progress at a certain stage, but really you need that kind of top buy-in, and you need everyone sort of to be on the same page with where you're going, which is easier said than done. And I think that things is a tricky one, where sometimes it can be kind of difficult to engage in that way and try and get people on that page, but there's definitely benefit in doing it. So I think that's certainly one of certain projects where that's been the tricky thing to crack, because once you do, then things can kind of move quite quickly. But yeah.
Thanks, Dan. Well, that's brilliant. I guess one final question from me. We've got a couple of minutes left, but we all understand the power of culture in exciting behavioural change. What can we do in terms of content? And I noticed you've shown us the campaign, but in terms of cultural content, how do you have any good examples of how performances or artworks, etc., have really communicated in a different, innovative and exciting way the climate emergency and the need for action?
Yeah, so to do it short, Season for Change is our arts commissioning program this year. Is very linked to the activities of the climate change negotiations as well, and there is an amazing examples. They go a website. We are collaborating with Arts Admin on this project, and it's amazing artists really communicating these issues in a lot of different ways. But there's also going to be a commissioning from the British Council also for the COPE, and that's globally. So we will be seeing as well very, very creative content and art, pieces of art coming throughout this year on those topics. And I think it's something that is really growing in an incredible creative way and engaging way all around the world at the moment, how artists are picking up these concepts and develop new ways of engaging.
Thank you, Graciela. So, and thank you to Will, Becky, Graciela, and to Julie's Bicycle overall for today's session. I think we've posted in the chat, and certainly it was on your last slide, Julie's Bicycle's website. Do get in contact with them. Clearly, this is a very important issue at the moment, and something that we all need to be addressing in every way that we can. So thank you for that. And with that, I will close the session. Goodbye to everybody, and please join us for the next one, which we will be communicating through our usual newsletters. Thank you very much. Goodbye.